I'm curious if you see this, but from my vantage point, the powerful thing about artificial intelligence, perhaps even more so than what it can do in the classroom, the bigger part of this moment is it has actually reinvigorated interest in this conversation about the future of school. And suddenly it feels relevant, tangible, and actionable. And, conferences are selling out. And I think the challenge is, how do we make sure that the conversation stays on this question of what is the future of school without moving too quickly to the answer of, well, it's just AI tutors and hyper-personalized learning and just like throwing, products. Because basically I think the space has been inundated so quickly with generative AI products that, and I'm curious for your take on this, right? Is like AI products certainly a component perhaps of this conversation. Like how much of the conversation about the future of school is truly about like the AI tools that we're going to use as opposed to some of this more maybe philosophical or almost like the spirit, the conversation about like what is the spirit of what we're actually trying to achieve?
That's a really good question. So I have many thoughts about this, and I think basically at the very base of this, you're right. There is a lot of interest in like what this is going to do. Like I think people's imaginations in 2022 were really fired by this, to your point, and now they're wondering, okay, how is this going to apply to my kid's school? Like what could they possibly do with this that will make a difference? I will say that it's probably a safe bet to say it's not going to make much of a difference just in terms of, basic achievement and NAEP scores. And we're already seeing, just last week we saw the, the flood of terrible, disappointing, very bad, no good NAEP scores.
Can you, just for our audience, explain NAEP?
Sure. National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's a test given in various forms every, 2 years or so. It basically tracks fourth and eighth graders' reading and math skills. And as we're seeing, now 5 years out of the beginning of the pandemic, they're just not really recovering in a lot of ways. In a couple of places they are. Louisiana, I thought, was a really interesting outlier where their skills of those kids, and I can't remember which group it was, but really defied sort of the expectations. But mostly, we're in a sort of a very kind of grim holding pattern. And it's been like that since actually before the pandemic, since like 2019, I want to say. Certainly the pandemic didn't help. So, but I don't think on the one hand, it's going to really have much of an effect, these new tools, these new ways of thinking on that, because it feels like very little, if anything, has any effect on that. And I'm not quite sure systemically why, other than that, there are lots of people who would say, we keep judging the standard for what it means to be basic and advanced, and so we're always chasing this standard that keeps incrementally increasing. But I think to me the really interesting question is like, what do we expect in terms of these tools, and like how much of that are we expecting to be student facing?
Right.
I would have thought at the beginning of all this 2 plus years ago, that it was going to be like all student facing. Like we were going to just get, tools that students are going to be using, 24/7. And it's just going to be just this sort of amazing revolution of kids just interacting with the technology and just doing different things and different kinds of learning. And it's just going to be, we can't predict it. I think to me, what I'm seeing, which I didn't predict, and that's just my lack of imagination, is to me the most interesting piece of this is not the student-facing stuff. It's the teacher-facing stuff. It's the applications that use AI to help teachers do, the kind of the basic tasks of life, the sorting and the kind of in some sense the drudgery, in some sense figuring out what students should be doing at any given time. And that can be as basic as like, predicting who's going to be absent or, you're familiar with all of these things. To me, those are the things I think we should really be paying more attention to. In a way, it's interesting because I talked to someone who said a couple weeks ago who said, AI is weird enough right now and is so unpredictable that I think until we like figure out more about it and how it works and really what it does, I don't think we should put it in front of students at all. Like, let the adults mess with it. But students shouldn't have access to this. Anyway, I don't know how you feel about that, but
there's this assumption that we are the AI education project, and so oftentimes, I actually will often now start meetings with, like, this is what this meeting is not. We are not here to try to put AI in front of all of your students, or rather, we're not here to accelerate that process. There's, I think, a lot of questions that need to be answered in terms of how to do that appropriately, safely, but also in a way that complements rather than replacing education. And I want to talk about like an anecdote specifically where that, like,
you're replacing teachers or replacing when you say complements?
Replacing that complements teachers.
Okay.
Yeah. But also that complements the learning process, right? I think, there is a world where you could imagine students. And in fact, if you go to China, they actually, I remember there's this picture that hit me really viscerally. It was students preparing for one of the big national exams in China. And they had this giant, like, I don't think it was even a gymnasium. I think it was a warehouse.
Okay.
And there was like 3,000 students in cubicles with headphones on, getting personalized learning. And it just hit me that even if the scores are higher, the idea of just a student sitting down in front of a computer all day, digesting information, there's something really wrong with that. And I see sort of flavors of that with this sort of obsession with AI tutoring. But it's complicated, right? Because actually AI tutoring is still really exciting and interesting as an after-school support, as a support for neurodivergent students, for students in special education more broadly. You're blind, if you're an English language learner, if you're deaf, right? This technology is sort of unequivocally going to add incredible value and in sort of like giving you access to learning that was otherwise, much harder to access. So it's very hard to say blanket, AI bans. I think AI bans, for that reason are sometimes looked down upon. And to me, that if I was a superintendent, it would be more like we're going to sort of just like pump the brakes. And you described it really well. We need to understand this technology. We can't just rely on what the vendors are telling us. And outside of the vendors, I've talked to most of the smart people who are really obsessed with this question, and most of the smartest people will admit that we don't have the answers yet.
And most of the vendors, by the way, in 12 months' time, are going to be moving on to something else.
If they have any capital left,
Right.